Lightning found the hilltop fence before we did, a white lash across a black sky. Edward's breath fogged in the cold. Mine caught in my throat. Somewhere below, the cattle bawled. Somewhere nearer, a truck door slammed that wasn't ours. We were not alone on the range that night either. I am in love with a cowboy. His name is Edward, and the first time I met him, my rented compact car was nosed up against a fence post at the edge of a caliche road, and a wet-nosed calf was breathing on my window like it was trying to make friends. I'd just moved to the high plains for a month, so I told myself, sorting out my aunt's things after she passed. 1 month to honor her, settle her little house, and head back to the city with my tidy life packed into boxes. 1 month to be practical. That was the plan I recited when the road seemed too wide, the sky too big, and loneliness too much like honest air. Edward's truck came on slow, a steady two-tone growl that matched the land. He parked with a care you notice when a person lives by their hands. He stepped out in a canvas jacket and hat, dark with dust and rain, and he didn't rush. He walked to the calf first, palms up, voice low. "Hush now, Butterbean," he said, like prayer and instruction were the same thing. The calf tossed its head, then settled as if it had been waiting for him the whole time. I rolled my window down. "I didn't hit him," I said, just in case he was about to accuse me of all the city sins I'd brought on my plates. "You didn't," he agreed. Eyes kind and quick, the color of the shallow water you find when you dig where you remember a spring used to be. "Gate came loose in that wind. I ought to have been here before the weather turned." "It's all right. I don't know why I said I was sorry twice, but my words wanted to be helpful. Do you need a hand?" He looked at my clean shirt and bookish hands, looked at the calf, and smiled in the soft way of a man who would not take more than needed. "Hand me that rope by the fence there?" I did, and he did the rest, simple as buttoning a sleeve. He looped the rope, soothed the calf, and slid the gate shut, checking the hinge with a little shake that told me he wouldn't put faith in anything he hadn't tested. Then he tipped his hat not as a performance, but a greeting as honest as the weather. "Edward Whitcomb," he said. "You must be May Cryer's nephew. I'm sorry for your loss." It startled me that he knew, but in that town everything passed like news on a porch. "Daniel," I said. "May raised me summers. Taught me to bake bread and mind my corners. She always said not to be a stranger, but I ended up being one anyway." He nodded, like he understood the shape of remorse as much as I did. "May was the bookkeeper out at the Whitcomb place 20 years back. She kept us honest in a way you can set your watch to. I always figured folks like her keep the world from tipping over. His kindness warmed a place in me I hadn't checked in a while. I thanked him. He told me to watch for antelope on the curves. He drove behind me until the road widened, then passed with a wave as careful as when he arrived. He left me with a day that felt different. The sky was still wide, the wind still honest, but loneliness gave back a step. I unpacked slowly in my aunt's little house, with the white porch rails she had painted, after the stroke took one of her hands and slowed the other. She had managed anyway. Her quilts were folded, her recipe cards in a box marked, "Trust your hands." The place smelled faintly of lavender and cedar. I sat a while without doing anything, the silence sweetly full of her. The next morning, I found the diner without thinking about it, as if I'd known all along where most people gathered to begin their day with coffee and decent pie. The waitress called me honey without checking if it would offend me, and I realized I loved her for it. I was stirring my coffee and trying to decide whether to make a list or let the day decide for itself, when the bell on the door chimed and Edward came in with wind on his jacket and that hat tucked under his arm. He nodded to people as if they were all family and made his way to the counter. When he saw me, he tipped his chin the smallest degree, then slid onto the stool a chair over from mine. "Morning," he said. "How'd the unpacking go?" "As well as it could," I said. May kept her house like a solved puzzle. I just kept finding pieces with their places marked. "That sounds like her," he said, and then we were quiet the way people are who aren't afraid of it. He ordered eggs and a pile of toast. The waitress put another coffee by my elbow without asking. And it felt like we'd been coming there on Tuesdays forever. A man in a starched shirt came by, all cologne and certainty. He placed a flyer by the register and 3 on the counter, as if we all needed homework. Kincaid Land and Mineral is hosting a meeting Thursday, he announced. Water management and modern opportunities. Good turnout last month, good results. This county is moving forward whether folks like it or not. The waitress slid the flyers into a stack with her old church programs and said, like she already knew the ending to that story and didn't much care for it. Edward picked up a flyer, read it, set it back down as if it burned. He finished his eggs in silence. Is that trouble? I asked, not wanting to pry but wanting to understand. We've always shared the creek like a handshake, he said. My dad did. His dad did. Kincaid bought up some old drilling rights and acts like water's a sweepstakes he just won. He's got folks believing drought is a personal failure. Some are selling, some are being nudged. Nudged? The word felt wrong. Fences cut, he said softly. Cattle spooked. A pump that was fine yesterday breaking without a reason. Folks make decisions under pressure they wouldn't otherwise make. I thought of the way his hands had quieted that calf. I thought of my own life in the city, all the pressure and none of the sky. What do you do? I asked. You set your jaw, pay your hands, watch your neighbors, and you don't sell what your grandchildren might need, he said. And you make sure folks know they can call you at night. His words stayed with me. After breakfast, I went to the little library where May had volunteered, sorting donations and writing notes in a tight, neat hand on index cards. The librarian, a woman named Birdie with grey hair tucked behind one ear and soft clothes that matched the carpet, pressed my fingers like she was checking my pulse. May was a light, she said. We could always see by her, even when the power went out. I told Birdie I could box up May's personal things when she was ready. Birdie smiled. There's no rush. Would you mind looking at some old boxes? They were in the back from when May helped us with the Historical Society materials. It wasn't a demand, more an invitation to stay an hour longer than you planned. The boxes smelled like paper and sunshine. I don't know how sunshine has a smell, but it does where I'm from. I found a ledger with the Whitcomb brand penciled in the corner, mid-1990s. Old but not dusty, in the way that made you sneeze with regret. May had written everything as if somebody's child would need to understand it in a hurry. There were notes about water use, grazing schedules, receipts from feed stores, a penning fee at the sale barn. Then tucked in the back was a copy of a letter on Kincaid letterhead, not 20 years old, offering the Whitcomb Ranch a cash solution if they would sign away a quiet little right none of us had ever thought about because it belonged to everyone. The flow of water in an ordinary creek as it crossed ordinary land. May had underlined the part about indemnity 3 times. She had written in the margin, in her neat hand, "Don't. There's more here." I closed the ledger, felt the drum of my heart like I'd run without moving. I didn't know yet if this was a torch or a flicker, but I knew it could burn. That evening the wind gathered itself and shook the eaves. I found one of May's quilts and sat under it, listening to something more than weather. I thought of Edward in his canvas jacket, leaning into the gale with horses to check on, fences to tighten, the sort of chores that ask for presence without apology. I tried to picture his evenings, and what I pictured made me ache. A pot of beans on the stove, a book that never gets finished because night chores eat time, a chair that needs the weight of a second person just to remember what it was built for. The next day, he came by with a sack of pecans and a carton of eggs. "From my trees and hens," he said, not as a courtship, but as care. We shelled pecans at my aunt's kitchen table like we'd made a plan before either of us knew it. He told me about his father, a man whose love was measured in hours of work and cups of coffee poured while standing. His father hadn't made space for softness, not because he hated it, but because he believed the wind would blow it away if you set it out where everyone could see. "What about your mother?" I asked, careful with my voice. "Kind," he said. "The shade of a big tree on a hot day. She died when I was 20. Dad passed last year. He ran that place with stubbornness and pride. Now it's me and the crew I can pay, and the dogs who think they're smarter than me. Sometimes they are." He didn't ask about my past, and I was grateful, People will tell you their stories if you keep them company long enough. And sometimes they don't need to speak at all for you to understand the shape of where it hurts. Still, as we brushed shells into a bowl, I told him about a man I loved who wanted my life to look just so and to sound a certain way on the phone, who wanted my weekends filled with the right dinners and not a crumb out of place. I told him how good it felt to be chosen and how empty it can be to disappear under someone else's preferences, and how I fled that polished place, like a bird, through an open window the day I realized I missed myself. He listened the way people listen who aren't planning their answer. When I finished, he asked if I liked cornbread with or without sugar, which in its way was as kind a question as I'd ever been asked. It took me a moment to understand he was offering to be ordinary with me, and that's a love language with no need for translation. Days stacked themselves into a shape I recognized as the beginning of a life. I helped at the library. I read on the porch when the wind let up. I went out to the ranch on a Saturday to help with a small fencing job that could have been done faster without me, but was done better for the company. He showed me how to lean a post hole digger in the dirt so it wouldn't fall. He taught me how to hold a staple in the web of my thumb without punching my skin. He laughed twice, once at the way I cursed and once at the way I apologized for it. There were signs of other things, the kind you notice only when they add up to a sentence. A tire track where no truck should be. A gate's chain with a link bent like a crooked tooth. A pump that groaned when it should have hummed. He had men he trusted keeping an eye on the far pastures. The sheriff swung by more often than usual under the pretense of coffee. Men like Kincaid always send cleaner men first, then rougher ones when politeness fails. One evening, a neighbor's boy, no longer a boy really, came by with a head full of questions and a heart full of fear. "Mr. Whitcomb," he said, "they came to Mama's, said they'd pay cash on the barrel and we could stay through summer. Said folks get hurt when the water goes wrong." His eyes shone with a rage he hadn't been taught to name. Edward put a hand on his shoulder and said, "You call me if anyone comes back. Have your mama call me. She needs a witness. Do not open the door unless you know who's there." That's not fear talking, that's wisdom. The dance at the Grange Hall came around the Saturday before Easter, as sure as church the next morning. Bertie urged me to go. "You'll see everyone you need to know," she said, "and some you don't. But clean dresses are a morale tool in this town." She winked and pressed a lemon bar into my hand, as if it were a ticket. I wore a shirt May would have liked. Plain white and ironed, and jeans that fit and boots I had to ask the clerk to explain to me. Edward arrived in a jacket that had seen its share of winters and the sort of hat you don't tilt unless someone's taught you why. He looked like the answer to a question I hadn't dared ask out loud. We danced to old songs and new ones and the quiet hymn of people knowing each other's names. He didn't push or grandstand. When we stepped outside into air that smelled lightly of rain, he stood with his hands in his pockets and watched a line of clouds collect at the horizon, like a promise. "I haven't always been brave," he said softly, as if speaking to the weather and me both. "I've loved few people and told fewer. My father and I made small talk over big chores. I'm tired of pretending there isn't room for softness in a life like mine." I stood there, with the light from the hall, making a small square on the dirt, and listened to the frogs down by the creek. I thought of the ledger at the library, and May's stern little note, and the neighbor boy and Birdie's lemon bar, and the way Edward watched the sky like it was a friend he trusted to tell the truth.
"I'm here," I said.
"I don't know everything, but I know that." He looked at me then, like a man looks at shelter and water. We didn't kiss there. There is a time and place for grand gestures, and we had time and places still. The storm built slow, then fast, as storms do. The air held its breath. Calves bawled for no reason, then for good ones. Edward moved like a man with a list only he could see. We loaded salt and extra fencing supplies. He told me what to grab, and I did it. I wore the extra jacket he kept behind the seat for company he never expected. We checked fences on the south pasture first. Then the north, because the north is where trouble begins when it arrives bone-cold and formal. Lightning stitched the sky. The creek ran chocolate thick and high, not dangerous yet, but it whispered plans. Then that hook of a moment from the beginning took its place on the page. The hilltop fence snapped under a bright white crack that made day out of night. Edward swore without heat, just the acknowledgement of a fact. We parked where the road still held shape, and we were out on foot before the echo died. We could hear cattle lowing, more than usual, a sound that rides your spine. We had our headlamps, and our breath made smoke in the air. "Stay close," he said. And I did. Not because he was a cowboy and I wanted to be saved, but because distance is foolish when you can have company in the dark. That's when the other truck door slammed. Not ours. We flicked our headlamps off in the same breath. It's a small trick, the way quiet has weight. Edward leaned toward me, close enough that I could feel the shape of him. "Stay behind me," he said, which is the sort of instruction that makes no room for pride. Voices carried. Two men, one with an edge like a blade, one trying to be sharp and not quite managing it. They didn't bother to hide why they were there. "Cut that wire," the sharper one said. "Run 'em into the draw. Tomorrow it'll look like they spooked. You get a few lost every season. You sure Whitcomb's not around?" His lights were down country. He stretched thin. It's a terrible thing realizing you've been counted as absent when you are right there. It's a fine thing to know the person beside you is more present than anyone counted on. Edward squeezed my arm and let go. He moved like intent. He didn't pull a gun. He yelled instead. A rancher's command turned up loud enough to rattle crows out of trees. "Sheriff's on the way. Get off my land. There are men who hold their ground because it's the only one they know, and there are men who scatter because the first stiff wind finds them." These weren't the former. They ran. One snagged his jacket on the wire he'd been aiming to cut and left a sleeve behind like a flag of surrender. Edward didn't chase. He isn't a fool. We leaned on the fence and breathed like the land was counting. The sheriff came. He was a man with eyes that had seen what eyes see and still liked breakfast. He looked at the cut in the wire, at the tracks, at the ripped sleeve, at me and Edward standing close enough to call it a posture. "You boys all right?" he asked. "We are," Edward said. "For now." "You want me to call Kincaid?" the sheriff asked, testing something. "Wake him up, ask him about his hired hands?" Edward shook his head. "Not yet. Let's collect what we can collect. If I call him, I want more than a torn coat. I want a reason that doesn't wriggle in court. And I want to talk to my neighbors before we start waving flags." The sheriff nodded. "You let me know. We're not playing the kind of poker where folks get to deal off the bottom. We fixed what we could fix in the dark, wired the fence as a patch until morning. We drove to the far pasture, where cattle had gathered in the low place, eyes shining like coins when our lights tracked across them. Then the rain came all at once, a thick falling that erased inches of dust in minutes. We sat in the truck and let it thrum on the roof, the kind of sound that shakes thoughts loose. "You afraid?" I asked him, not daring to be brave just for the romance of it. "Of what?" he said honestly. "Losing the place? Yes, making a mistake. Yes, being alone in it. More than anything." He looked at me then. "You? Of pretending I don't belong anywhere," I said. "Of talking myself out of good things, because I'm afraid I won't know how to keep them." We didn't solve anything with those words. But we pointed ourselves at the truth, and that's the first step of any road. The next day, after sleep that came late and left early, we went to the library. Birdie set out coffee, as if the world was a little cold, and what we needed was warmth and caffeine. I brought the ledger I'd found the week before and set it on the table like the bread at the center of a meal. We read May's notes, the letterhead, the careful arithmetic, the underlines. Edward ran his finger along the margins and said her name like a blessing. In the back of the ledger was an envelope I hadn't noticed, taped with the kind of tape that breaks if you breathe on it. May had written, "To Edward, if it ever comes to it." I'm not nosy. It's just that I love what's honest. He looked at me, then at Birdie, then back at me, and I nodded because permission isn't always about whose name is on the envelope. He opened it with the reverence you bring to some altars and all kitchens. The paper inside was a copy of an old deed from a time when the county clerk's office had a pen and a sense of justice. It named the creek as a navigable waterway at certain flows, protected under state law, and it included language about shared use that was comfortable as a handshake, because that's exactly the kind of agreement it was. It also had a scribbled note stapled to it. Kincaid's granddad tried this in '64. Judge Hollis told him to go sit on his hat. "I thought my dad had kept everything," Edward said, grief and relief playing tug-of-war in his voice. He would have liked this. He would have liked to see someone else's hand on the lever. We took the documents to the sheriff, who took them to the county attorney, who called a person in the state water board, who used words like injunctive relief and smiled the way people smile when they know which way the wind is going to blow and it's the right direction for once. Kincaid scowled at the meeting that week. He spoke about modernity and progress, and people listened like they always do when a man with shiny shoes brings gift bags to the end of the aisle. But when he sat down, Edward stood. He isn't a speechmaker. He spoke like he fixes fences, steady, no waste. "My father pulled me out of school when it was time to carve," he said. "He let me go back when they were on the ground." He believed in work. He believed that if you didn't have calluses, you needed a plan to earn them. He wasn't always good at listening, but he was good at staying. This creek belongs to the people who live here and the people who will. We didn't borrow it just to sell it and then pay to drink our own water. We're not going to be fooled into hurting ourselves. Not this time. There was silence, the deep kind. Then the neighbor boy's mother stood. She had on her only church dress and a cardigan with one elbow mended twice. "Mr. Kincaid came to my house," she said, voice steady as stone. "He said my boys would be safer if we sold. I've been poor and safe before, and I've been poor and scared. I know the difference, and I know what makes it. I'd rather owe my neighbors a favor than owe a stranger gratitude. That's all." People nodded, some slow, some with a little hitch that meant tears were close. Kincaid left without taking his suit jacket. Somebody hung it on a hook by the door, like maybe he'd come back for it and finish the conversation he started. He didn't. It wasn't the end of trouble. That never comes all at once. But it took the wind out of the meanest sails. The men who cut fences cut fewer. The calls at night slowed. The sheriff had a very loud conversation in the parking lot with a man who used to be mean and had grown older but not wiser. That helped, too. Meanwhile, in the spaces between chores and community meetings, a life grew like wheat, slow and surprising if you stand still long enough to watch. I started spending evenings out at the ranch, folding into the rhythm without being told what to do. I learned to hear the difference between a horse's happy snort and his "there's a snake" snort. I learned to respect the old dog, Scout, who knew how to find shade and how to find me when I stood too long with my thoughts. One night, after a day that kept giving us small tasks until we finally ran out of daylight, we sat on the steps of the bunkhouse with mugs of coffee that tasted like effort. We didn't talk much. The stars were out. The noise of the world was reduced to crickets and the small sound a tired man makes when he takes off his hat and rubs the back of his neck. "I want to say it right," Edward said, quiet. "I don't want to make it a big speech with all the big words. I've lived under the idea that if I kept my head down, I'd keep what I had. But I've learned that some things won't be kept that way. I don't want to be alone in my own house. Not anymore." I set my mug down so I didn't drop it because my hands had started to shake. "I don't want to be a brief season," I said. "I don't want to be the visitor who shows up for a weather event and goes back to the airport. If I'm here, I'm here." He reached for my hand like it was a tool he needed for a task he had waited too long to begin. When he kissed me, it was steady, warm, the kind of kiss that says there is time and we intend to use it well. No one cheered. No one needed to. The stars did their job and so did we. Not everyone in the county set out welcome mats. That's all right. Not everyone has to. People who had been quiet all their lives smiled at us in the feed store with small nods that meant something generous. Birdie brought 2 lemon bars at a time, which is how offering lasts. The sheriff asked if we needed someone to stand in a doorway from time to time. We told him we had it in hand. He trusted us, and that helped. Weeks later, the grass came in a little greener. Calvers kicked at nothing because they could. We repaired the fence on that hill not for the first time and not for the last. We planted a row of saplings along the drive because shade is the kind of wealth you leave for someone else. Kincaid sent a polite letter informing the community that his company would be redirecting investment to a different project that appreciated their vision. Birdie read it aloud in the library and said, "Good," then used it as a bookmark in a cookbook. Spring warmed to summer the way it does when you let it. We drove to the county fair and watched children try to keep hats on their heads in the wind. Edward entered a pie auction with a pecan pie he swore wasn't as good as mine, which was kind and untrue. I fixed a lamp that had belonged to his mother and thought about how many rooms have been lit by the same small mercy. One evening, after a day so fine it felt like thanks, Edward walked me to the cottonwoods at the creek that had endured more beaver and drought and childhood forts than any stand had a right to. He had a look about him like a man who had found the right pocket knife in his drawer. He took my hand and cleared his throat. "I asked the world for a safe plan," he said. "The world gave me you instead. That's better. I want to build something with you that lasts longer than secrets and holds up in storms. I want you on bad days and good breakfasts. I want your books on my shelves and my coats on your hooks." It felt like the simplest vow in the world. We kept it simple. We said yes to each other. We said we would show up and be kind and tell the truth and fix the fence when it breaks and share the quilt when the wind gets mean. We ate a slice of pecan pie off the same plate because somehow that mattered. And we walked home under a moon that minded its business. Not every day has been easy since, because such a promise comes with mornings of sore backs and evenings when the wind won't quit and the washing machine sounds like it's chewing nails. Some days we forget to speak good words and remember to be patient only after the coffee has gone cold. But we make it right. We apologize when apologies are due and laugh when we are blessed with the chance, when fall came, with the cottonwoods thinning and the sky getting that hard, brilliant look that warns you to set your stock tanks in order. We took the old ledger out again. We put it on the table and thanked May out loud, because gratitude needs a voice now and then. We tucked the deed back into its envelope and put it in the safe with room around it. Space enough to remind us that the important things don't need to be jammed once. In the storm, like the one that first threw its arm over our shoulders and introduced us to each other's courage. We heard a truck door slam that wasn't ours and felt the old fear rise up. The breath-catching kind that takes you back to the first night you met trouble. We stood together, hands at our sides, not in our pockets, because we didn't have anything to hide. We turned on the porch light because the good thing to do is not to make anyone walk in the dark when they don't have to. It was the neighbor boy, a man now in a better and fixed truck, carrying a casserole in a dish with his own name written on masking tape. He grinned sheepish. "I should have called," he said. "Mama said bring you this. It's her apology for those words she said about my manners when I didn't take my hat off in her kitchen." "We'll take an apology in casserole any day," I said. And he smiled like maybe it was all right to learn how to be new. I don't measure life in big moments anymore. They come, they impress, they pass. I measure by little ones. The scrape of boots on the step when he comes back from checking the lower pasture. The way he sets his hat just so on the peg, and I know what kind of day it was by the tilt. The warmth of Scout at our feet while we read. The dog sighing when a story reaches a soft place. The clean shine of a repaired fence line that catches the afternoon light and makes you feel like you did something that will matter past sunset. I still keep a suitcase under the bed, not because I intend to leave, but because people who have moved a lot make peace with the idea that a bag packed can be a comfort and not a threat. It's mostly empty now. It holds May's recipe cards and a small framed photo of my mother laughing in a dress she sewed herself, and a note from Birdie that says simply, "You're home. I am in love with a cowboy, yes. But I am also in love with the way he hands me a broken thing and trusts my hands to try." I'm in love with the town that calls me honey without checking a manual. I'm in love with the idea that we don't sell what our grandchildren might need, whether it's water or courage or a decent pie recipe. I'm in love with knowing that on nights when lightning finds a fence before we do, we have more than one pair of hands to fix it and more than one kind of light to see by. The land still asks us to show up. We do. We've stood on that hilltop more than once since, and every time the sky is wide and honest and the wind is a question we answer together. We are not alone on the range. Not anymore. And every morning, when he pours coffee and checks the forecast and kisses my cheek with a steadiness that could lift a house, I feel the quiet joy of ordinary love, a life worn in all the right places, strong enough to hold, gentle enough to invite, certain enough to stay.